Hi friends, in Planet Earth Dating, it's Sunday, May 2nd, 2021. In both the Lynn Life and the Jamie Body Mind, the authorized souls remain only child souls from the deeper, denser dimensions. And all other souls from all other dimensions, as long as the souls are already living by the many search for truth rules, already given to the search for truth community by wiser minds above all of us. And those rules include, of course, attempting to fulfill our own sacred promises to the divine, that which we said we would do before we were born. It is, in fact, the purpose of our life. Some people call it fulfilling their destiny. And it's crucial that we attempt to do that. And our Ra told us that how we are evaluated is whether or not we continue to attempt to fulfill our destinies, not whether or not we achieve them. That it is okay to die trying, but to really try. It doesn't count if we aren't really trying. And they tell us what days to film and where to film and usually when to film. And this past couple of filmings, we've not been able to discern in advance what the filming topic is, but we can tell that we're supposed to film now and here. And they say then open your eyes, and what we're looking at, what we're facing, out of these eyes we can see an area where approximately 100 trees, by our estimate, have died during the last 3 years, possibly in the last 2 years. And they're also talking about our 20-year learning process, being trained in the art of restoring native spaces to areas that humanity has disturbed or destroyed. And we had maybe 16 years of that in one location, working on maybe a third of an acre, just by hand tools, learning by doing what works, what doesn't work, what it looks like at various stages of the process. And now we've moved to this tiny farm, and our restoration area is maybe an acre, maybe.
That's right.
And it was much more heavily disturbed than our last attempt, and so the challenges are bigger. And we already knew it was more heavily disturbed based on how bad things were when we got here, but we didn't know that there was a challenge lurking in the depths, that there was a trash dump that is at least 30 years old. Neighbors have told us it was here before the house was built.
That's right.
And that it included things like tires and paint cans and kerosene cans. We found a can of paint thinner. And we now think it also included things like car batteries, because we had an episode of the water shed returning to its normal levels. So there was a dry lake bed, or an almost dry lake bed, and then the lake rose to its normal levels, which haven't been seen around here in maybe 30 years.
That's right.
And they were at the normal levels for maybe a year and a half.
That's right.
And maybe 60 trees that were inside the confines of the lake died because the lake came up. But the lake was there first, and the lake belonged, so we were okay with that. And then the water receded, and the die-off continued up in this area where the old trash dump was.
That's right.
And so our best guess is that there were car batteries in there that were just kind of sitting there, just poisoning the immediate surrounding area right around them. And then when the water came up, the toxicity was spread throughout the land, and 40 more trees died. Big trees, we're not talking small trees.
Yeah, that's true.
And this is happening in an era when we need more trees, not fewer trees. And so then we try to look for the gifts, because when distressing things happen, it's really important to find a way to think about them, that we don't just stop trying to fulfill our destinies. How can we think about this? We have to look for the gifts, and the more devastating the situation feels in our hearts, the more important it is to keep looking for the gifts until we find a lot of gifts, and to write the gifts down, because we will forget them. And it's helpful to have the gift written, a list of gifts written. When we're feeling really sad about the situation, we can pull out the list of gifts and say, okay, well, that's true. That is a positive aspect of it. So one gift of this area is that it helps us learn, like this is the next level of difficulty of restoring a disturbed area.
That's true.
Now they're talking about what you see in disturbed areas is you see aggressive plants growing, and it's often a combination of invasives and native plants that are aggressive.
That's what they're talking about.
And aggression is an enormous problem in our biosphere. Possibly the biggest problem that exists in our biosphere. Although now somebody's saying selfishness, now they're arguing about what
There's a lot of yelling upstairs about it.
Yeah, what the biggest problems are. So we'll just say it is an enormous problem. And that these aggressive native plants have a purpose in the land restoration techniques, is that we can put the seeds and whatnot of the aggressive plants and cuttings, seeds and cuttings, because often they will sprout again from the cuttings. Put seeds and cuttings from the aggressive native plants, not non-native. Non-native, just they don't belong. Get them out and put them on the driveway in the baking sun so they die, and then do various things with them depending on what other categories they fall into.
That's right.
Lots of rules. However, with the aggressive native species, what we could do is put their cuttings and seeds in that waste dump area, and they are much hardier. They're able to make a go of it, and they will uptake the toxins and process them with their own bodies in a kind of a Tonglen way of being. And then maybe in such a way the land can be restored, and maybe after the winged sumacs and the elderberries have had their way and the pokeberries have had their way, maybe then more oaks will be able to make a go of it once again, or more hickories, or more sweet gum. For whom is this message, and why do you ask? You might be trying to find a use for aggression.
Yeah, that's what that feels like.
We just think that in this biosphere it's time to put the aggression down, and it's time to stop fighting, and we have to put the guns down and put the weaponry down and put the armies down and just stop it. And the pendulum has swung way, 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 way too far to warfare and aggression and bullying and violence, and that if that were going to make things better, wouldn't it have done it by now? And so this taking up of the toxins,
that's what they're talking about.
They're talking about it's a far, far better thing I do than I have ever done. It's the Charles Darnay quote from Tale of Two Cities.
That's right.
One of Dickens's great novels. And Darnay was sacrificing himself for the good of somebody who he thinks he loves, and he might really have loved her.
That's right.
Because he was willing to pay a price to help her in an action that he himself did not benefit from. And possibly that would be a good definition of love. Willing to pay a price for that, for the beloved, in a way that does not benefit oneself. A selfless, courageous act on behalf of the beloved. Actions do speak louder than words, someone is saying. For whom is the message? Why do you ask? Now, if you look behind us, you'll see an area where there are many ferns, and those ferns are in that spot for multiple reasons, including they were there when we arrived. And then the question was, do we leave them here? Do we move them elsewhere? Do we pull them up and say, no, what is required with these ferns? And the first thing first is we must do research. And this was a new ecosystem to us. We've only been in this ecosystem this 4 years. We had 50 years of awareness of a different ecosystem, so it was a little easier game. And so once again, the challenge level amped up because now we have to learn these new plants and figure out, do they belong here, yes or no? And that was the question with those sword ferns, because they're very aggressive. It's so funny because fern bars are supposed to be gentle places, and ferns are seen as gentle plants, and they're extremely aggressive. So the question is, are those aggressive ferns native or non-native? Because we would handle them entirely differently. And there are both native and non-native sword ferns growing in Florida.
That's right.
And they look very similar. And so it's a good question, right? And we believe that these are the non-native version.
That's right.
And we have found them sprouting in the woods, and so we have pulled them up by hand everywhere we find them out in the woods. But here, because they're supposed to be isolated in this area that is mowed, and it's far enough from the woods that hopefully the spores don't get in the woods.
That's right.
We've left them here because they hold the hill really well, and we have big erosion problems on this hill, Goose Hill Farm, so named because it's on a hill. And we have a goose who's old and has multiple physical issues, so we don't know how long our goose will be with us. So we have a geriatric goose, a grumpy geriatric goose.
That's right.
And if you look in there, you'll also see some elephant ears coming up, and elephant ears are not native and they are aggressive, but we have a history with these particular elephant ears. We found their oldest member in a roadside ditch in 1982. And we had just moved into a new house that had no landscaping, and we were not flush with money. And so we dug them up out of the ditch and carried them home and planted them in our yard where they look very nice, and also put some in a pot as a potted plant on the patio where it looked very nice. And that was in 1982. And we've had that plant for 39 years, that plant. And so to not bring it with us when we move seems wrong, and so we put it in this area knowing that it will have a hard time spreading out of there, but it is a problem species were it to be left untended. And now what do you do with a 39-year-old friend who's a problem species? A friend of 39 years who's a problem. What do you do? So friends, you might notice our love bugs, which are a twice annual event in this area, and they are not native. They're an invasive species, and by and large the native species don't eat them.
That's
and
right.
That's one reason why non-native species are able to proliferate so rapidly, is that they're the natural predators, or the things that would naturally keep them in check, didn't make the trip with them. People have been working for at least 50 years to figure out how to solve the problem of love bugs,
That's
and
right.
there's no solution yet. Frame is the message. Why do you ask? We don't think we're smart enough as a species to be left in charge of anything.
Oh, that's true.
And we think that we enjoy these restoration projects because they're so challenging and they take so long and they're so difficult and they require so much repetition. And if you're intending to learn, they are delightful opportunities. But if you want to just do something once and have that be successful, you would hate it.
That is true.
You'd have to find a different way to think about it. You would have to want to learn. And if you want to learn, then there are fascinating challenges. And
That's right.
many people want to leave their mark on the land. And what they usually do is just come in and knock down trees, which any moron with a bulldozer can knock down a tree. And it usually is morons with bulldozers that are knocking down the trees.
That's right.
And it's much harder to restore an ecosystem to health, and it's much more satisfying. What now to inspire a divine miracle to stop this destruction in a fair and just way? We think that would be the first step when the bulldozers are chasing us down the street to roar into new patches of remaining trees and knock them down also. Wouldn't that be the first step? Stop the bulldozers.